Something in the Middle East has snapped, and it's never going back to the way it was. For years, Iran and Israel fought each other in the shadows, using proxies, covert operations, and deniable strikes that everyone understood but nobody fully admitted. It was a dangerous game, but it had rules, limits, a kind of invisible ceiling that both sides tried not to break. That ceiling just shattered. Today, Iran and Israel are hitting each other directly, with missiles, with drones, with the kind of weapons that were built for full-scale war, not quiet chess moves on the margins. And when those missiles started falling toward Tel Aviv, it became clear to everyone watching, this isn't just another flare-up. This is something much bigger. The chain reaction that led to that night over Tel Aviv didn't begin with sirens or explosions. It began with a decision inside Israel. Israeli intelligence identified a strategic facility deep inside Iranian territory, a site they believed would become a far greater threat if left alone. In Israel's strategic mindset, waiting for a threat to mature is often seen as more dangerous than striking first. So planners didn't ask whether this facility was dangerous. They asked how dangerous it would become if ignored. That logic pushed them toward the same conclusion they've reached many times before. Act now, before it's too late. The operation that followed was precise, focused, and carried out far from the public eye, but its impact was anything but quiet. For Israeli leaders, the strike was a necessary preemptive move, a grim calculation to neutralize a threat before it could turn into something worse. For Iran, it was something entirely different. It wasn't a tactical raid or just another covert hit. It was a direct strike on Iranian soil, a line that, in their view, should never be crossed without consequences. In Iranian doctrine, failing to answer a blow like that doesn't calm the situation. It destroys credibility. It tells every enemy watching that Iran's territory can be hit without paying a price. And for a regime that heavily relies on deterrence and image, that's simply unacceptable. The decision to respond wasn't a tortured debate drawn out over weeks. It was quick. What took time wasn't if they'd respond, but how far they were willing to go. This was not going to be a symbolic volley to save face on the evening news. Iranian planners started preparing something much larger, a response built to remove any doubt about what Iran could do if pushed. They wanted to send a clear message: strike Iranian territory, and you won't just get a handful of rockets in return. You'll face a scaled, coordinated, and very visible show of force. That message arrived in the sky over Israel. When Iran finally moved, it didn't start with a single launch from a single location. It began with a wave. Long-range drones lifted off, joined by ballistic missiles arcing upward from Iranian territory, their trajectories guided toward a familiar name: Tel Aviv. This wasn't some randomly chosen city off a map. Tel Aviv is Israel's economic core, its tech hub, its beating financial heart. It's where global capital flows in and out, where startups grow into giants, where the country's commercial life concentrates into dense streets and high towers. And suddenly, that city, home to roughly 3 million people in its wider metropolitan area, was under direct missile fire. The first sign for civilians wasn't a flash in the distance. It was the siren, a sound that every Israeli knows, but nobody ever truly gets used to. For people in Tel Aviv that night, there was no long countdown, no calm announcement. One moment you're asleep, scrolling your phone, eating dinner, driving home. The next moment, the alarm cuts through everything and you have seconds, not minutes, seconds, to decide what to do. It's not an abstract concept, it's a race against time. Parents grabbing their kids out of bed, people in elevators slamming buttons, drivers pulling over and sprinting for cover. The difference between reaching a reinforced room and being caught in the open is measured in heartbeats. Israel has spent decades building a civil protection system around exactly this nightmare. Modern residential buildings are required to have reinforced safe rooms. Public shelters are scattered across neighborhoods. Emergency procedures are drilled over and over, sometimes as routine exercises, sometimes in very real moments of danger. This infrastructure has saved lives in the past, and it saved lives that night too. But every system has limits. Civil defense plans were built around a certain amount of warning time. Ballistic missiles coming in at extreme speed compress that window to the edge of what people can physically do. If you're asleep on the far side of your apartment, if you're out in the street far from shelter, every second of delay is a risk you feel in your chest. While families rushed into safe rooms and shelters, another battle was unfolding high above them. Israel's layered air defense network came alive. Most of the world knows the name Iron Dome. It's the system that made headlines intercepting short-range rockets in earlier rounds of conflict. But what came at Tel Aviv this time wasn't just a barrage of simple rockets. It was a mix of drones and ballistic missiles designed to stress that defensive web at multiple levels. That meant other systems had to take center stage. Higher up in the sky, David's sling and the arrow system stepped into the fight. David's sling is designed to handle threats that sit between the short-range rockets Iron Dome was built for and the long-range ballistic missiles that can travel across entire regions. Above that, the Arrow system, particularly its more advanced variants, is tasked with intercepting some of the most dangerous incoming weapons during their high-altitude phases. Together, these layers form a defensive shell: radars scanning, computers calculating trajectories, interceptors launching to meet threats head-on before they can reach crowded cities below. From the ground, the scene over Tel Aviv looked like something out of a nightmare. Streaks of light cutting across the sky, sudden flashes as interceptors met missiles mid-air, explosions echoing over a city crouched in shelter. For people hiding behind thick concrete and steel doors, each boom carried a double meaning. It could be a missile being stopped, or one slipping through. The system was working, but even the best-designed defense isn't built to be perfect. It's built to be as effective as physics, technology, and budgets allow. In a mass attack where dozens of missiles and drones are coming in from multiple directions, it's almost inevitable that some will get past the shield. That's exactly what happened. A fraction of the missiles made it through, and when they did, the cost was immediate. Some struck buildings that had been emptied seconds earlier as people rushed to safety. Streets that would normally be full of cars, bikes, and late-night diners stood almost deserted, taking the brunt of blasts that could have killed far more if the timing had been different. Firefighters moved toward plumes of smoke as others ran away. Medics scrambled to reach the injured, sifting through debris and shattered glass. The physical damage was real. Craters, collapsed sections of buildings, burned out vehicles, but the psychological damage was harder to measure. Living in a city where any ordinary moment can be interrupted by the sound of a siren and the knowledge that something deadly is inbound changes how people think, how they sleep, how they move through their day. It turns everyday life into a series of calculations. Where's the nearest shelter? How fast could I reach it? What if the alarm sounds right now? That mental strain doesn't show up in casualty numbers or crater sizes, but it builds day after day. And this confrontation didn't stay on a straight line between Tehran and Tel Aviv. Iran made a deliberate choice. It widened the battlefield. Long-range drones and missiles didn't just go toward Israel. They were also directed at American military facilities across the region. These weren't random attacks meant purely for shock value. They focused on critical systems, air defense radars, communication hubs, and installations that helped the U.S. military see and shape the battlefield. By going after those nodes, Iran wasn't just trying to damage hardware. It was sending a message to Washington. That message was blunt. This isn't just an Iran-Israel showdown. Any power stationed in the region, any country with bases, troops, or radar arrays within reach, is now part of the risk map. For governments with soldiers deployed in the Middle East, that changes the political equation. Leaders now have to answer a harder question. How do you justify keeping your forces in a region where they can suddenly find themselves under direct missile or drone attack from a state actor willing to show its reach? The U.S. didn't respond by packing up and leaving. Instead, it raised its readiness, moved assets, and made clear it wasn't stepping back. But the signal Iran sent will echo in every future decision about deployments. Behind the explosions and images on the news, analysts started doing what they always do in moments like this: counting, measuring, and modeling what Iran actually has at its disposal. The focus quickly narrowed on one thing: Iran's missile arsenal. Over years of investment, Iran has built one of the largest collections of ballistic missiles in its region, ranging from short-range systems meant for nearby targets to longer-range weapons capable of flying across the entire Middle East and even beyond. Recently, their push into faster, more advanced hypersonic-style systems has worried planners even more, because those weapons shrink already tight reaction times down to almost nothing. But Iran's strength isn't just about any single missile. It's about the way they use them together. Military planners call it a saturation strategy. The logic is simple but brutal: overwhelm the defenses. First, you throw large numbers of cheaper drones and shorter-range threats into the sky. Each one the defending side chooses to intercept eats up an expensive interceptor missile and time. It doesn't matter if every one of those early drones gets shot down. Their real job is to drain the magazines, to force the defending systems to spend their resources. Then, once the defenders have already fired off a chunk of their interceptors, the more advanced missiles arrive. They're faster, more accurate, and more destructive, and they're coming at a defense network that's already been working at full tilt, with fewer interceptors left and less room for error. The bigger the first wave, the more pressure the second can exploit. In the Tel Aviv attack, the scale of the initial barrage was large enough that this doctrine wasn't just theory, it was visible in real time. But this war isn't only being fought in the skies over Israel or the deserts of the Gulf. Its shockwaves are moving through something that touches almost everyone on the planet: the global economy. Even before the missiles flew, energy markets were sensitive and prices were high. The moment serious military activity flares up near the Persian Gulf, traders react instantly. They don't wait to see if a tanker has actually been hit or a pipeline destroyed. They price in the risk that something might happen. At the center of that risk is a narrow stretch of water, the Strait of Hormuz. Around a fifth of the world's traded oil flows through that choke point. Any hint that shipping there could be disrupted? whether by direct attacks, mines, or just threats, sends insurance costs soaring and pushes oil prices up. That, in turn, feeds into everything from airline tickets to food transport to heating and electricity bills in countries that have no direct role in this conflict at all. When the Tel Aviv attack happened, markets didn't see it as a local event. They saw it as a sign that the broader regional conflict might spill closer to that narrow, vulnerable waterway. As energy prices jump, companies start making moves of their own. They look at where their ships travel, where their suppliers operate, how exposed their logistics chains are to Middle Eastern volatility. Some reroute cargo, others hedge fuel costs, some delay investments. Those decisions pile up into something much larger. Inflation, higher production costs, and economic pressure that ordinary people feel in their wallets. That's how a missile launched in the Middle East can eventually show up as a higher price on a gas pump or a grocery receipt half a world away. Behind the scenes, diplomats, intelligence officers, and political leaders are locked into a familiar but increasingly fragile dance, trying to keep this from spiraling into something far worse. Back channels are buzzing. Third countries are passing messages. International organizations are floated as mediators. Nobody wants to see the region tip into an all-out war that could drag in multiple states and wreck the global economy at the same time. The same tools that have prevented past crises from escalating out of control are being pulled off the shelf again. But the forces pushing toward escalation are not imaginary. On both sides, domestic politics rewards toughness over restraint. Leaders know that if they appear weak, they'll pay for it at home. Military doctrines built on deterrence and credibility push planners toward action rather than patience. And the history of this conflict is full of moments where analysts said, "It won't go further than this," only to watch the situation escalate anyway. Each new strike, each new target hit, narrows the space for de-escalation just a little bit more. Right now, key decisions are being made in Tehran, in Jerusalem, in Washington, and in other capitals that prefer to stay out of the spotlight. Those decisions will determine whether what just happened over Tel Aviv will be remembered as the high point of a crisis that slowly cooled down, or the opening chapter of something far more devastating. What's clear is that the missiles that hit Tel Aviv were not the final act. They were proof that the rules of the game in the Middle East are changing, and that the rest of the world no longer has the luxury of pretending this is just a distant regional fight. And as long as the sirens in cities like Tel Aviv can sound at any moment, as long as missiles and drones can cross borders in minutes, and as long as a narrow stretch of water can shake the global economy, one question hangs in the air for everyone watching. Is this the peak of the storm, or just the beginning of something even darker?